Is decent.
There you go.
There I am.
All right. So let me see what I've got here. I can move you here. All right. So this is Student Leadership Academy interview for a workshop planned on April 24th with Brandon Clarke. And I'm happy to have you here with us, Brandon.
Pleasure, Jason. Thank you.
So it couldn't be live, but we know that you're busy and you're doing a lot of great work. So I'll start off. This is my chair in the background of my office. So I took a picture of it, and that's why I'm not actually in my office.
No worries.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, background.
Well, I am a product of City University of New York. I am a alumnus of LaGuardia Community College, where I graduated in 2012 with a liberal arts degree in media studies. And I am presently enrolled at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, formerly known as the Joseph S. Murphy Institute for Worker Education and Labor Studies. And I also am a public servant. I have been an employee of the New York City Council for a cumulative total of more than nearly 6 years now. I work presently at the City Council as the Legislative and Budgetary Affairs Director for Councilmember Ida Miller, who represents the 27th District in Southeast Queens, consisting of various neighborhoods, including parts of Jamaica, as well as Springfield Gardens, and also St. Albans, Hollis, and Queens Village.
Great, nice. So you mentioned that you are a product of CUNY, a couple of campuses. Can you tell us what your roles were on those campuses? You know, besides being a student, no, that's an important role, but other roles?
Well, I was enrolled at LaGuardia Community College for a cumulative total of 10 years. I first enrolled as a student in fall of 2002. And as I mentioned earlier, graduated in 2012. During my time there, I worked as a college assistant for the college's then Office of Student Life, as well as a employee of the college's Enrollment Services Center to provide information relating to the gamut of services that are provided through the ESC, as well as to disseminate information relating to admissions and other information relating to colleges' policies and other pertinent matters for the student to be able to navigate the college bureaucracy. In my final year at LaGuardia, I won election to student government. And in my capacity, I also represented the college before the University Student Senate. I also served in my capacity as a member of USS on the CUNY Board of Trustees subcommittee. I can't quite recall which one at this time. That's my my history as a student leader at CUNY, um, as best I can recall. But if you ask me some pointed questions, I'd be happy to provide you with pointed answers.
So you served in USS and you were in the student government at LaGuardia. So those are very special programs, unique programs, and provide opportunities for students to take action. And you mentioned the Board of Trustees. Can you talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that you were involved in that helped CUNY students when you were involved with
I
USS?
would say the two most impactful initiatives, both locally at LaGuardia Community College and university-wide for CUNY. I'll start with locally at LaGuardia Community College. The Help America Vote Act program that I helped to coordinate and conduct to register students of the college to serve as election day poll workers for the New York City Board of Elections. So this was done in partnership with a nonprofit organization that advocates for persons who live with disabilities. So we recruited students on campus to undergo both mandatory Board of Elections training to serve as election day poll workers and be able to assist their fellow New Yorkers with the electoral process, and also a special training that was conducted to provide election day poll worker assistance for individuals living with disabilities who face a unique set of challenges in the course of performing their civic duty and exercising their right to vote. I wish I could say off the top of my head how many students that we had recruited in total, but I believe that we had doubled the goal that we had set. So by that measure, certainly the program was very successful. And then I was subsequently asked to coordinate a university-wide voter registration campaign on behalf of the university. So this was CUNY Central in partnership with the University Student Senate to do a voter registration drive as part of National Voter Registration Day. And so it coordinated with the Help America Vote Act coordinators at the university's campuses, along with fellow student leaders, to organize localized activities at individual CUNY campuses to register students to vote. And we also had a large National Voter Registration Day event that was held at Lehman College at the time in partnership with a number of advocacy organizations, as well as local radio station as well, I believe. And there were some celebrity participants involved as well. Rosario Dawson, for example, who's very who's known for her work with, I believe, Voto Latino. I believe that was one of the organizations that we were partnered with at the time. And that event as well, that initiative, not just the single National Voter Registration Day event itself, was successful in registering a number of students to vote at the time. Again, the exact number escapes me, but I'd be happy to provide that information offline, as we say in government.
It's okay. You don't have to have exact numbers. So you spoke a little bit about your time at CUNY and getting involved in local politics, and you also mentioned a little bit about the work that you do now. So maybe you can flesh that out for us a little bit and give us a sense of what you're doing and how you're impacting lives each and every day, even today.
So by virtue of my engagement as a student, not only in government and student affairs at CUNY, I was also able to avail myself of opportunities to learn more about government, both at the local and state level. I was recruited to enroll in the Ernesto Malave Leadership Academy at CUNY. And later I enrolled in the Edward T. Rakowski Internship Program for Government and Public Affairs. I attended the annual legislative conferences in Albany, one of which, SOMOS, Albany, in the state capital of New York, they hold an annual mock legislative session known as the Model Senate Session Project, in which students from both City University of New York as well as SUNY State University counterpart participate in a simulated legislative debate on a topical public policy issue, and actually conduct a vote. And it requires many of the techniques that are customarily employed by legislators in trying to advance a legislative goal. The topic during the year in which I participated in 2012 related to hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's known, which has since been banned by the state. And through my enrollment in those programs, I served as an intern at the district office of New York State Assembly member Phil Ramos, who is a state legislative representative in Suffolk County, Long Island. And ultimately, that put me on a path where I would later become involved in political campaigns. Well, I had been involved in political campaigns actually prior to my internship opportunity with Assemblymember Ramos. In 2009, after President Obama's election, at the height of the healthcare reform debate, I was actively engaged in grassroots advocacy for the passage of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as you know, it's known today. And that was the my first foray into politics, which later grew ultimately to my active involvement in student government affairs and student affairs in general, and then later into government and public affairs for the city's legislative branch, which is where I currently work today.
Some of my favorite programs, and I think we met probably through some of that along the way.
I can't quite recall if it was through those programs in particular, or if it was by virtue of the annual conference, at the time anyway, the annual conference of elected student representatives at a particular CUNY campus. And the year that I was elected, LaGuardia Community College was the host.
Yeah, LaGuardia. We used to visit LaGuardia every year for, you had ran a leadership conference. I think Brian Goldstein and his team was in charge of that.
Yes.
Nice. We used to come out every year. That was a lot of fun. And I got to meet some of your predecessors and some of your classmates. I'm still in touch. I told you that. It's such a nice group of students from LaGuardia from that time. I really
Yes, indeed.
To know them.
No, they began as associates, and they later became colleagues, and then friends. And the number of them whom I am still very much in touch with are like family to me, as are you, for that matter, Jason.
Thank you. Okay, tough questions. You ready? Yes.
Come at me.
All right. What was the one thing that you learned as a college student that you think has helped you the most in your professional life?
Well, my time as a student at LaGuardia, as I mentioned earlier, I was enrolled for 10 years non-consecutively. Um, After my first full academic year, which followed a several year bout, severe bout with depression, which ultimately led me to drop out of high school and later earn my GED once I had emerged from the doldrums, so to speak. I had what I could only characterize as my most successful year of academic performance ever as a student. And then shortly before the end of that academic year, my father suffered a debilitating stroke, which he survived, but nonetheless, it left him with long-term damage. And so that had put a considerable strain on my mother and I to support our household financially. And it sent me personally reeling a bit after what had been a very painful ordeal of battling through depression and understanding myself, um, understanding, coming into recognition of my identity as an individual, compared to the ambiguity that existed during my formative years in junior high and high school. And it took a lot of fits and starts along the way for me to be able to persevere through that. And I did that with the support of family, um, with the support of my employers at the Office of Student Life, um, Greg Faulkner and Irene Sosa, who were the co-coordinators at the time. They were mentors to me, and they encouraged me ultimately to stay the course and to remain within the university. So based on those experiences, what wisdom do I have to impart? I would say that college is the opportunity in which you truly come into recognition. At least it can be. College is not for everybody. Um, and that doesn't mean that if you don't go to college, that you cannot be successful. But you may encounter additional challenges along the way. But for those who are enrolled in higher education, it's an opportunity for self-discovery. It's an opportunity to identify what your principles are, the things that you value, um, to better understand what motivates you in life, what your passion is, and what you may seek to pursue professionally, and that the resources are available to you to make those connections, to basically um, bridge your way from one point to the next along that journey until ultimately you reach a point where you've achieved success, and then you build on that success, having learned from your past experiences or your past challenges. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the best
I'm
answer
looking.
that I
Can
can.
you looking for the mute button? Are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So, can you flesh that out a little bit? And just the last part in terms of like growth opportunities and overcoming the challenge.
Sure. So when I enrolled at LaGuardia Community College, my career interest was in broadcast journalism. Growing up, I had a very keen interest in current events. I was a news hound. Um, And then that gradually increased with certain historical events that really shaped my worldview. Say, for example, the 2000 presidential election, Bush versus Gore, the attacks of September 11th, the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, as well as, of course, the election of the first Black president, Barack Obama. But by the time I was in my final year of LaGuardia Community College, my interest had changed parallel to my involvement in electoral politics to government and public affairs. And I began to pursue that actively. And from my time at CUNY, because I've not only worked at LaGuardia Community College, but also worked at Brooklyn College, as well as Kingsborough Community College. There were challenges that I faced in trying to support myself financially, while at the same time pursue my professional goals. And by the time I graduated from LaGuardia, I transferred to Brooklyn College as a student. And again, I performed well academically, but about a third of the way into my first academic year, I began to lose interest because I was eager to make strides professionally. And so I took chances. And by virtue of the legislative conference that I attended in 2013, it was again Somos in Albany. I met an associate at the time from LaGuardia. We encountered each other. His name was Roberto Perez. And I used to broadcast a radio program at the college called the Perez Notes, in which he would interview local elected officials and community leaders to talk about politics and public affairs. And so he was working for then public advocate Bill de Blasio at the time. And the public advocate had actually visited Brooklyn College to speak to the students there. Well, he was campaigning for mayor. And I was already keen on him as a candidate for the office and was interested in volunteering my services on his campaign. So when I went to Somos, the opportunity presented itself to join the campaign. And I was told to stop by the campaign office in downtown Brooklyn following the conference, which I did. And then I came aboard with the campaign and served as one of the campaign fellows all the way through the general election. And by virtue of the work that I did there, as well as some additional electoral campaign work that I had done apart from that, I made connections that led me to my position at the city council. And it was actually my involvement in USS that led me to establish a relationship with the first council member that I used to work for. Prior to council member Idanique Miller, I used to work for then council member Reuben Wills, who represented the 28th district in the city council. And he gave me my first legitimate opportunity to demonstrate my value as a dedicated and eager public servant. And for that, I will always be grateful. So the point that I'm making is you may have a sense of what you would like to pursue at the outset of your enrollment at your school, your institution. But that can change, and you have to be receptive to other opportunities, particularly opportunities that you would not necessarily consider otherwise. I mentioned earlier that I'm currently serving as my council member's director for legislative and budgetary affairs. When I interviewed to work at the city council for my previous member, I was intent on selling myself on my communication skills, which I have a natural ability in. And so what I hadn't realized at the time when I interviewed for the position was that he was seeking to fill a vacancy in legislative affairs. He was looking for an LD, or legislative director as it's known. And he asked me if I had worked with legislation before, and I said no, but explained to me what it entailed. And they saw enough qualities in me to afford me the opportunity to take that on and to see if I would be successful in fulfilling his legislative priorities, which, for the limitations on his abilities as a member, due to various circumstances which are widely reported in the press at the time, I was able to do that. And I learned from my colleagues at the city council working at 250 Broadway, which is where the legislative offices of the city council are located, that you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer by profession or pursuing a degree in law as a student to be an effective legislative director. All you need to be able to do is to read analytically, think critically, and perhaps most important, and this speaks to what you learn as a student, particularly if you happen to be engaged in student government or in student affairs, you learn how to establish and maintain relationships. And by virtue of the work that you do, you network and you meet with other individuals in different spheres revolving around, in my case, government, public affairs. And that creates potential future opportunities to advance yourself personally as well as professionally. So be receptive to opportunities and not necessarily the ones that you yourself assume that you will be able to succeed in. And I'll just add, in addition to legislation, now I also serve as a budget director. And I personally, over the course of my life, have frankly not been very proficient mathematically to the point where it caused terrible anxiety, especially in grade school. So basic arithmetic notwithstanding, which I've since become more proficient at, I am not a numbers guy. But budget is not all about numbers. And by happenstance, I became charged with the duty of overseeing my council members' budget priorities as well as his legislative priorities. And so while that has been challenging at times, when I first was tasked to serve in that role, it was smack in the middle of the budget season, which was a very hard entry to say the least. But now this is my first full year, although we have the dynamic of trying to fulfill those budget priorities in the midst of a global pandemic, which will have severe ramifications on the city's fiscal outlook over the next two fiscal years, certainly this current fiscal year and the one beginning on July 1. But it's also an opportunity for me to edify myself and to broaden my knowledge base and to add to the value that I've attained over my years working as a professional in government. But again, it began in no small measure with my involvement in CUNY as an elected student representative, and also as an employee at Student Affairs. So again, be receptive to opportunities. And you never know where they'll take you, but you may be surprised by the end of it. And I'm pleased to say that the work that I do, for all of its challenges, and the strain that it puts, quite frankly, on me and my family. I have a wife and I have 3 children. So odd hours. It is especially gratifying to know that the work that I do has purpose and meaning, and that it has made people's lives better.
Thank you for taking time out to inspire others. So my next question is, a lot of people have had a little touch in your life. So have you had a mentor or two that specifically moved you forward or helped you to move forward?
Oh, absolutely. Individuals, well, heavens, Jason, there's you, for example. Um, Dr. Tony Maniscalco at Edward T. Rogowski, I mentioned earlier. Greg Faulkner, Irene Sosa. You mentioned Brian Goldstein earlier, Chris Singh. A number of individuals that I've met along the way. I too many to name, quite frankly. But people who have provided guidance and direction, encouragement, especially in low points in my life where I wasn't certain about what my trajectory was, professionally, if not personally. I mentioned earlier that I live with depression and social anxiety disorder, and so that is an ongoing challenge that I contend with at various junctures. But I have the support of my family, my wife, my children are my touchstone. They help to keep me grounded, especially when the high octane demand of government and public affairs weighs on me. So there are many different people who have helped to shepherd me over the course of my life. And I'm also a person of faith as well. And I've had my faith challenged many instances over the course of my life. But my faith, I would also be remiss to not say, helps to keep me centered and really keep me focused on the things that are of true importance and to maintain perspective. I'm sorry, Jason, I can't hear you.
I said, well, you have a lovely family. It's nice to be at your wedding and see you on that beautiful day.
And you as well, sir. Thank you.
Lovely children. Yeah, I didn't know how to press the mute button there. Let's see. So what so far in your professional career, I know it's challenging, but what's been the best moment so far?
Oh, the best moment. Well, it always feels good to pass legislation. I could say that there are different types of legislation that I have helped to advance to vote that ultimately led to enactment. Legislation relating to workers' compensation benefits, legislation relating to survivorship benefits for the family members of deceased municipal workers, quality of life legislation relating to commercial vehicles, particularly tractor trailers, legislation relating to voting rights, particularly voting rights for incarcerated individuals who are detained in New York City's jails. Um, I can't think of a singular moment off the top of my head right now, to be honest with you. But certainly, I've been fortunate to have a number of legislative achievements on behalf of the city, and certainly, the members that I've worked for, Danique Miller and Ruben Wills. So, is there a particular standout? No, not a particular standout, but each of them, I would say, gratifying in their own way.
Okay. So now the other side of the coin. What's been the hardest moment so far in your professional career?
Ah, goodness. The hardest moments. Well, I'll say this. My academic progression, because in the time that I've been working in city government, certainly, I've been sitting on my associate's degree that I earned now nearly 10 years ago. So there's a nagging urge to fulfill my academic pursuits. This is my oldest son, Matthias. Say hello. And that has been stymied in part by the work that I do at the city council because the demands are significant. These are non-traditional hours, so not 9 to 5, but 9 to 9 or later sometimes, or even earlier to later. I mean, I've worked 12 hours or more. I've worked on weekends at times. And it is very much working at the council of what have you done for me lately business, because the members themselves, they have considerable demands on them to be able to provide for their constituents, especially those who have the opportunity to run for re-election. My member does not because he's term limited. So his final year in office will be 2021 next year, which coincides with the next municipal election. Nonetheless, even members who are term limited from the council have ambitions for higher office to serve as borough president or greater. So again, going back to what I was saying, it is very much a what have you done for me business. The members seek instant gratification, and tempering their expectations while still fulfilling their priorities can be very challenging. It can certainly be taxing physically, if not emotionally. During the first year that I worked for my council member, while I was enrolled in my second semester at CUNY Labor, it was at the end of the previous legislative session. So each legislative session at the council is 4 years in total. So this was the 2014-2017 legislative session. And this was the end of Melissa Mark Viverito's tenure as Speaker at the council. So, and a lot of members who were term limited were also leaving. Thus, they were trying to advance legislation that they had introduced, but votes in which had long been delayed. So there's a particular bill relating to commercial waste disposal. And my member was not a sponsor of, he did not author per se, but that would have an impact on his district, and an adverse one at that. And so there were internal discussions about the legislation that ultimately found their way into the public domain. And it basically compromised efforts to get the legislation enacted in a manner that would be mutually beneficial to all parties, including my member. And so there was a very vicious public relations campaign against my member in particular, despite the conversations that he had with his fellow colleagues at the council, being, very, at least what we believed at the time, to be frank and earnest, but not disagreeable. And we were trying to work to resolve those differences. And then when those discussions were leaked to advocates, and then when the legislation fell through, the public relations campaign against my member was swift and severe. And my predecessor at the office, his legislative director had left a few months prior to. So we were basically caught flat-footed, and it was almost just, for several weeks trying to establish a narrative that accurately depicted the tone of those negotiations and what the needs of my members' constituency were compared to what the advocates were suggesting. That was extremely, extremely difficult. And it also, because it coincided with my academic enrollment at CUNY Labor, I ultimately had to end up withdrawing from that semester, which in many respects is still unresolved. And that was, a personal disappointment that was very deflating for me. And that was not a pleasant winter, to say the least. Mute button again. I'm still here.
All right, there you go. You there?
Yes.
Sounds extremely challenging. I don't know. I've dealt with some challenging things, but that sounds like it can probably make you lose some sleep, I would think.
It did.
All right, let's go to simpler times. How about that? A little bit.
Sure.
Your advice for aspiring people who are going to watch this are student leaders. For a student leader, what do you believe is the most important thing they can do to make an impact on their own campus?
A lot of what I had learned about the student experience was informed by my work as one of the college's staff, as a college assistant at Student Life and also at Enrollment Services. And so I would say that it's important to listen not only to your fellow students, but also to listen to the staff members on campus and to the instructors, the professors, to get an understanding of what the college experience is like on both sides, and to try and identify where those gaps are between the students' needs and what the school and its representatives are able to do to help the students satisfy those needs, to try and bridge that gap. It requires a lot of, I have an axiom that I've adopted and employed, and I impart on my children. Knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. I've learned a lot, but I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, and I don't know what I don't know. So that's to say that you learn more by listening than by speaking. And it's better to, you want to be a forceful a forceful advocate. You want to be passionate, but you have to understand that the best way to achieve things is through collaboration and through understanding those who may not be in agreement with you, what those differences are and how they can be addressed in a way that is mutually beneficial. Working in government, whether it be student government or in government locally or elsewhere, it should never be considered a zero-sum game where one person wins and one person loses. It's about compromise. And it's about moving the ball forward. You know, they say every inch is a cinch. So listening and understanding and working collaboratively and establishing relationships. And also, I would say trying to find points of common interest. Because even though there may not be an opportunity to work together with an individual, with a party of individuals on a particular matter, there may be areas of intersection at some other juncture.
I think that kind of runs into the next question, which was, you know, as the unique sort of student leader that you've been over the course of your years, what advice would you give to somebody about their own leadership identity and how to establish it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I apologize.
Just as a student leader, what would you recommend for somebody to establish their own leadership identity? I mean, you kind of said it with some of the things that you just remarked on in terms of collaboration and looking for common interests and things like that.
So, to establish your own leadership identity, that's a really interesting question. To give that some thought, I would say knowing what kind of leader you are. Some people, like myself, are typically quiet leaders and they prefer to do their work behind the scenes and not necessarily be out in front. And some are very much the public face of an advocacy campaign. So understanding whether you are really one of the leaders who prefers to be publicly out in front, publicly facing, or one of those who leads but leads quietly by example. So we all have different leadership styles. As well as understanding what the things that you value are, understanding what your principles are, the things that you feel passionately about, that you believe have purpose and meaning, and advocating for those principles, but doing so with integrity, doing so in a way that is respectful, but at the same time speaks truth to power, that is not willing to be subservient to any higher authority. So understanding what type of leader you are, what are the things that you value, the principles that you hold, the ideals, and advocating for those things with integrity. To summarize.
Sounds great. Yeah. Okay, so for the students that want to get involved in governance, whether it's city, state, national, what steps do you recommend they take?
get involved. Identify an issue of concern that you feel passionately about, a public policy issue, whether it be related to healthcare or housing, whether it be related to education, higher education. Um, it starts locally. So attend a community board meeting, for example, or join, if available, a local civic association. Understand more about the issues impacting your community locally and work with your neighbors and your community's leaders to try and not only advocate for change, but also to actively work to promote change through collective action. Be informed. You need to know what is taking place locally in your community, as well as in a macro sense, what is taking place in the borough, as well as in the city, state, and throughout the country on the federal level as well, because all politics is local, but at the same time, a lot of these systems of government are interdependent on one another. And so what actions are taken within one level of government may ultimately have an impact on the local level, and understanding that relationship. And it requires a lot of dedication. You have to set aside the time to be involved. You have to make sacrifices. So one of the things that I've come to say as a working professional in government is that my time with my family comes at a premium, because besides family, work dominates the whole of my time, and often at the expense of maintaining some of my social relationships. And so it requires sacrifice as well as dedication. That doesn't mean that you can't live, a robust life personally. It's just a matter of establishing that balance. And where politics is concerned in particular, you certainly want to, if you so decide, to lend your assistance to an elected official or someone who is seeking elected office. You want to understand what that elected official or candidate's principles are, what their platform is on how to make gains and to achieve provisions for the community. And hopefully that individual identifies, or rather you identify with that individual's principles, that you can relate to them and be able to wholeheartedly invest yourself into that campaign. And to the extent that it's not a perfect match, then who best embodies those principles? That's the question that you would have to ask yourself. And who do you believe, while not the ideal candidate, I'll take the current presidential campaign, for use that as an example. My preferred candidate for president, I am a registered Democrat. So while Joe Biden is the presumptive Democratic nominee, during the Democratic primary, which has not officially ended, but effectively, since all the other candidates have since dropped out of the race, I supported his candidacy over Bernie Sanders and the other candidates involved, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, etc., because I believed him to be the best candidate among those in the field. Not that I necessarily agree with all of the positions that he has taken over the course of his political career, over the course of his career in office at the Senate, to say nothing of his tenure as vice president under the Obama administration. But I believe that my interest will be well served under a Biden administration, under a Biden presidency. Then they would certainly, by a Trump presidency, an extension of a Trump presidency, and that he himself is the one who is in the greatest position to do the job effectively based on his understanding of not just government, but also his work as a former legislator, compared to some of his contemporaries who have similar experience, but not nearly as extensive. And so I say that to basically suggest that while you also want to be high-minded and idealistic, you also have to be practical. I think it's important to be able to keep perspective on what is achievable. One of the things I often say about government is that people have a lot of misconceptions about how it works and what it can provide for. And there are real limitations to that at times. And so one of the things that I personally seek to do is to help people better understand how government works, how it operates, so that they can inform themselves about the processes and avail themselves of what it does provide, but at the same time, so that they themselves can use that information to empower themselves and to effectively advocate for change.
You're very skilled at this. You know that, right? I'm sure
I can be long-winded, but I just,
no,
I
think
try
this
to
is
answer that.
no. I think it's very informative. I think it will help a lot of students out who are interested. I mean, you covered a number of the questions that I had here, just from the one question. So the big question: what's the long-term goal for Brandon Clarke?
Right now, my immediate goal is to establish a stronger foundation for my family. So that is that entails the completion of my bachelor's degree, as well as working to advance myself professionally, which will be challenging, certainly, given the current economic climate. But I can say that I've been blessed with an abundance of favor for all of the hardships that I have dealt with over the course of my life. And I spoke earlier about my faith, so I know for a fact that my family and I have been blessed for an abundance of favor, with an abundance of favor, rather. And I am ever hopeful and optimistic. My wife, she is a working professional in early childhood education, and she's working to advance herself academically. So while my pursuits may have been delayed, supporting her in the fulfillment of her goals, which she is further along than I. That is a goal of mine as well, providing that emotional support and encouraging her to achieve, so that we together as a couple and as partners can build a stronger foundation for our family. And the extent that I would be able to continue doing that, working in government and public affairs, would be a blessing. But I do realize that at some point, the needs to provide for a, a more comfortable standard of living, um, may outweigh, my interest in serving the public. So oftentimes, there are opportunities that arise working in government to remain within the nexus of government public affairs, but to do so in the private sector, working for a nonprofit organization, which opportunities to do tend to be somewhat more lucrative, certainly than working at the city council.
So no long term. It's not a run for the president of the United States at some point.
So going back to what I had said about leading quietly, um, it's been suggested to me, that I should pursue a career in public office, and that I should be an elected official and run. Um, I haven't ruled that out entirely, but that's not a personal interest of mine going forward. And I would be content to be a chief of staff, or to be a senior administrator or a senior ranking official within the government administration. But no, electoral politics for me personally, as a candidate, that is not an immediate goal of mine. My focus is primarily on my family, and again, advancing my academic goals, achieving those pursuits.
Again, I think you've jumped ahead a little bit of me, but what are the things that you hold most dear to you in your life?
It's certainly my family, and my love and adoration for my family also has, in recent years, heightened my sense of awareness of my physical health. I'm certainly not as young as I used to be. I'm 38 years old, but I have a family history of diabetes and high blood pressure. I mentioned earlier that my father was a stroke survivor, that I need to be mindful of, as well as some other health concerns that I need to make certain that I'm addressing in a timely manner, because I want to be able to live for my family and for my children, who hopefully will have families of their own. I should be so fortunate, without imposing my vision on them, and to be able to live to see great grandchildren and possibly even great grandchildren.
Okay, so here's the thing: you've accomplished a great number of things. Now you have this unique opportunity to jump in the time machine and go back to meet yourself as a student leader. And what do you think? What are the things, the pieces of advice, the little tidbits that you would give to a younger Brandon J. Clarke, who's just getting started, from the more mature, seasoned Brandon J.
Um, don't second guess yourself. Don't overanalyze. You have a wealth of ability. You have an excellent support system. People believe in you. Your body of work speaks for itself. There is no limit to what you can do. So don't hold yourself back for reasons of fear or self-doubt.
pretty deep stuff. So first of all, I want to say we've got to get you back and get you that degree, so that you have that, because that's something that I know you will share with your children and your family. Getting those degrees, starting with the one and maybe, number two and number three down the road. Those are important, so that you
Yes, they are.
motivate the younger folks in your life. I know that it's important to a lot of people to show their children that they have made an effort to get their degrees and pursue an educational life, because obviously we all want our children to do that. It's not the only road to success, but it's very helpful on the road to success. So that's one. And if I can help in any way, I'm always here for you.
Of course.
Second, we enjoyed your wedding so much. It was nice to meet your family, your father. Whatever things had come on him previously, he was enjoying your wedding day, from my perspective. And I think we very much enjoyed your wedding day. It's the last time that we actually were able to go on like a date, and with all quarantine going on now,
Yes.
I don't see any light in the tunnel ahead. So we look upon it fondly, and your wife and your children are all very lovely. So they are. You should be proud, and it's. I'm really happy for you. I mean,
Thank you, sir.
one of the student leaders who I have gravitated towards over the years. I still remember, even though I forgot it earlier in our conversation, I still remember seeing you for the first time. It was up on stage at LaGuardia Community College, giving your remarks, and you were as poised and thoughtful as you have been today. And I have some photos they're blurry photos, but I have some blurry photos of it. I remember that, and I remember. I think we actually had a conversation behind the scenes in the student life office that day as well. And I think you were very kind to me that day, and those things sort of resonate. I think that's probably why people who you work for, who you work with, who you have collaborated with, value. I know that you're spoken of very highly amongst your peers. Not only just from LaGuardia, but across the university. You know, what Brandon says is important to a lot of your colleagues, and definitely to me. So keep doing what you're doing. We value you. We expect nothing but the best from you. Thank you for giving me a little bit of your time today. We all have familiar obligations in this crisis. So thank you, and thank your family for giving you the time to do this. And I'll give you any last words for the students of the Hostos Student Leadership Academy at Hostos Community College.
Jason, let me just say thank you very much for affording me this opportunity. Obviously, there are limitations on what could be achieved at this time because of the current pandemic, as well as the great many obligations that I, working as a professional in government, have to my council member and his constituents, as well as the city at large, in providing an effective government response. That said, I would certainly welcome the opportunity to come back and speak with your student enrollees and Hostos Leadership Academy. Hostos is very dear to my heart as well. I've established a great many relationships, personal and otherwise, during my many visits there. And I would just say, to those who are watching or listening, Hostos as a community college, it'll afford you the opportunity to not only advance yourself academically, but professionally, if you allow it to. If you are dedicated and committed to your investment as a student there, then you'll have an opportunity to reap the benefits. But it also affords you the time to discover yourself, discover who you are, your identity, your principles, and your values. So while you are going through the minutia of being a student, at the same time, explore, see what is out there, test your boundaries, be willing to exceed them, and be receptive to new opportunities, make relationships, and try to maintain those relationships.
Great advice. All right. I know you have big work to do for the city. Keep us safe. Keep yourself safe. Regards to the family. And we'll be in touch. Don't be a stranger. I love you too. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, brother. I love you. All the best to you and your family. Please stay safe, stay healthy. Everyone, please take care of yourselves, socially distance, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk again.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir.
All right.